Basically, a village is losing its autonomy, both economic, political, cultural, environmental, to the outside. Yeah. So how do you revitalize that autonomy? And what are the aspects that we find important from whatever we heard in the last 1.5 days? And then whatever our own other experiences, what we would like to posit as some of the key points when we are talking about a village autonomy. A village autonomy, to my mind, would also be placed in a region where there are important centers, because basically what happens is the regional centers of trade and influence actually dominate and emasculate the village. So how you look at the village in a place of in a region, but making it village centric at the moment.
And how that trend needs to be kind of looked at and opposed or dealt with. And you have to decide that you are always contending with them. It's not a question of vitalizing a particular craft. It's also a question of fighting a certain other trend and how you're going to deal with the incoming influence.
What about autonomy? What do we, when we say that village had autonomy, I'm not sure whether I know or agree with that village ever was an autonomous unit, and at least in the present scenario, what would autonomy mean when we want to revitalize livelihood, but we also have to depend upon external markets, because even where the production is local and all the raw materials are being sourced locally, in very few cases is the consumption being able to be local.
At least in the Adivasi economy, one thing that is very clear is the introduction of the capital economy into an Adivasi economy has brought about tremendous amount of changes. They were not part of a capitalist economy in living memory. Perhaps other village economies were also not, but may not be in living memory. But Adivasi economies, by and large, within living memory, if they were part of the capital economy, it was in a very, very marginal or peripheral manner. So in other words, what it meant is their needs were met through their own production or through barter from other groups to a very large extent. Very, very few of their needs, like salt, if you take central, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, all those areas, salt was one of the primary requirements which they had to get from outside. And it was also the primary source of exploitation, because they didn't produce salt and they got into salt. But so by and large, so the introduction of the capital economy. So one of the things we are looking at is how do we take away the power of the capital economy and not to make it such a juggernaut. It's like a tank that's rolling through our villages. And a lot of these aspirations are created because of the access to capital or the access to money. That's it. And microfinance, which everybody talks about, which we are very, very strong critics of, has furthered this. And what you're saying, this philosophy of less. What microfinance is directly opposed to that. It was a philosophy of more. Consume more. So we'll give you loans very easily. So this making the availability of cash and capital within an economy has just pushed people into this thing. And now NGOs jumped on that. And when we're talking about enterprises, we're again, the moment we look at enterprises, we're looking at markets. We're not looking at building resilient economies. We're looking at products and selling the products, converting the product into cash. We're not even bothered about the consumption. We're only looking at how the product can produce cash. Who consumes it, how they consume it, that's not my concern, as long as I get cash for it. So this is a very underlying issue if you're looking at alternatives, is how do we change the role of cash in our present economy and the role of capital in our present economy. And I don't want to go deep into it because of sharing, but this is the work we are trying to do through Just Change and all that, and we are looking at capital in a different way, looking at things. And very briefly, within our tribal economy, which we are working now there in Gudulu, we are not taking the larger thing, because there has been an economy which is with the community. It was a community economy. So one of the things that we have reached at this point of time is recognizing that cash is what has undermined their collective economy and their collective spirit and has individualized them. It is cash that has individualized. They share everything except cash. Whatever they get, they share. But the moment they get cash, it's private ownership. So the concept of private ownership is also introduced through cash. Not even land was private. So it has massive impacts. So what we are trying to do, we can't roll the clock back. We can't go back to a pre-cash era because that's not possible. So what we're trying to see is whether we can collectivize cash, whether people will pool cash in and then meet their needs collectively as a group. So collectively buy cloth, collectively buy rice, collectively buy vegetables, collectively buy mobile phones, if that's what you want. But bring back the collective by collectivizing cash, by pulling cash.
If it is about collectivization of money, then you're still resting your whole approach on some surplus being generated somewhere and it being plowed back. If Timbuktu got some money in its organic farming effort initially, with friends putting in some money, where did they get the money from? It came out of a particular model of an economy that some people had that extra thing. Today, if we are talking about proso millet, being paid 30 rupees for by a set of people, where are they getting it? So in the end, you are talking about some surplus being plowed back here, whereas the romanticized village economy that India used to have, the way Kalashram Guruji, what's his name? Ravindra Sharma or someone describes it. The Jajmani system. Is a system which did not monetize most things, which had clear values of sacrifice, cooperation and trust built into a sort of economy. And if we bring only a few elements of it into our interpretation of collectivization of cash and so on, and say we'll run on fair trade principles and so on, I don't see anything fundamentally changing. The edifice is still the same. We're only saying let's plow back the surplus. When she talks about let's get the public sector investing more money and so on, Chidambaram or someone will immediately say, where will we get our thing from unless we generate it through this model?
I think one of the threads that goes across all the initiatives that we have talked about is that there is a community involvement that grounds the work that is being done. Whether you call it an enterprise, whether you call it alternative education, whether you look at alternative livelihoods. So what is the scope? So right now we have only public-private partnership means the government or the private sector, a private company. But most of the initiatives that we talked about, there is something called the community. Now how do you get community at various levels to be part of this process of the means of production, the returns, the regulation of what is a fair wage, what is well-being?
Today when we're talking about re-looking at the village, I think there are a few lessons that have come out, mainly from the women's experiences, I would think. One is what you brought up just now, which is slowly over a period of time you can generate your monetary resources also, mainly through thrift. A second thing seems to be about commons and collective holding of resources, even in terms of ownership and management. The better examples of women creating well-being for themselves have come from collective enterprises and not by individual enterprises. Even if you had an SHG giving individual loans to women, those experiences have been very different from those other experiences where there have been collective land lease and so on.
The hierarchies of within the family or within the village, etc., do exist. Even if you communitize the capital, how are you going to deal with the hierarchies that still are? So you back to square one.
In one sense.
In one sense.
There are experiments.
One evil at a time.
There are experiments, for instance, of acknowledging time spent, time banking, that which includes care time spent. So there are communities, for instance, that are looking at actually capturing how much we are contributing in different kind of resources and being able to work out a balance of recognizing and giving dignity to everybody's contribution in a non-monetized way, so that the community itself becomes a sharing of that resource which everybody is pulling in and everybody is taking back from.
what Stan is talking about and what we are talking about is how do you give value to that actually? Because our mindset of capital and thing is not giving value to that. Exactly. And I think the feminist movement in terms of the whole homemaker's value, for example, I think we have to learn from that. Similarly, the whole question of the exchange that happens of not only labor, when we talk about in the village, we talk about, I go to do weeding there, and I do plowing there, and I lend my bullocks there. But I think the larger thing, for example, the work that she's doing with artisans, I mean, the whole question of the services that were offered at the village level, and was based on this kind of exchange in which money did not need to have a place. And there's a significant amount of that which actually still takes place.
At one level, the elephant in the room is capitalism also.
The collectivization of money, I don't mean money, then commodity and back more money. I mean commodity, money and commodity. If I want to start an enterprise, the community says, okay, you go ahead. What all you need, resources, you take it. So, unless we in our subvertive kind of way decide that the way in which we'll operate the SHGs or these things will do this kind of subvertive work, that it will not take money from the banks, it will just lend it from the community, even when the community doesn't have rupees. But say, okay, you go ahead, we'll use your services. You need a place, okay, we'll give you a place to operate. So it's not just agriculture, it's also secondary occupations. Education is another one. Education is the first one that we can start with the alternative economy. After all, the teacher and this and that are if you offer them credit to start the school, that means they can start with whatever they have and you build the resources from the community, then automatically you have the money for the school.
The point is, if we break this process, which is, commodity, cash, investment, production, consumption, cash generated through production and surplus, and then reinvest it. If we want to break that, we have to break that cycle first. That's the thing. And what we are all proposing is break that cycle, and you will need, that's where the collectivization of cash comes. But then the possibility of, if you have got enough going, you can have your own currency. And there are examples of alternate. That's where the regionalization, the link of the village to a region comes, because you can have regional currencies. Just as you have a national currency of the rupee, you can have a Gudulur currency of the Adivasis. And it's something we are talking about alternate. We are far from that, but there are evidence of alternative currencies. So the point we are making here, and to what you're saying, Praveen, rather than take this big, look at capitalism as the big elephant in the room, just forget about it. Money plays different kinds of roles in an economy. What we are trying to do is to break the power that capital has. And if we reduce money to being a counting mechanism, it's to keep track of economic interactions, keep track of trade or services or anything like any economic. It's only a counting mechanism. Reduce it to that. And take away the power where only capital is seen as the investor. Why isn't the labor an investor? So why doesn't the labor get a share of the profits? And that's what the cry of injustice we're trying to say is that investors are investors of capital, investors of labor, and investors of consumption. Because all three contribute to the generation of surplus, and all three have a claim to the share, to the thing. That's the kind of thing.
In fact, the success of modern day economic thinking, not capitalism itself, is to say that the final arbiter of what is efficiency, etc., is the shareholder and capital. And that the prime recipient of any profit or any efficiency is only capital and not anybody else. And that we have allowed to happen in the last 30 years, which was not there earlier. Because in basic economics you learn land, labor, capital, organization, risk. You say that only the capital takes the risk. Actually, they don't take risks. It's not just the village we are talking about. We are talking about the city and the peri-urban and the... What is it that the city is doing to the village is a very important part of this.
As people, ever since the 90s, started getting engaged with markets and realizing markets is an issue and the NGO sector started doing, the immediate thinking is looking at urban, middle class and above markets and value addition of products.
Niche markets,
value addition of products, so you make clothes for them. So the Fab Indias, the Fab India is the success story. But in India, the poor and the rural are, in terms of volumes, are much bigger consumers. So why, and so my suggestion is what we are trying to do in Just Change, is focus on products which are being consumed by poor people or rural people and create marketing chains among rural people. Because that's where your rural markets are. That's your rural markets. Because the cost of trying to sell to an urban market is phenomenal. So now we have lots of urban friends of ours who want to buy our products. We said we'll sell it to you, but you are coming in as an individual, it's going to cost you the earth. You want it, you get it. So soaps which we sell at 12 and 14 rupees, we sell about 100, 120 rupees to our urban friends. You know, but we're not bothered. That's not our market. But every one of my urban friends immediately thinks, oh, we'll help you to sell your soaps. I said, I don't need your help to sell your soaps, ourselves. Because our communities are buying, they make it in the community, they sell it in the community. You want it, you want something we have, you pay for it. So I just want to flag in, because even yesterday, a lot of the presentation, everybody is looking at these urban rich people to sell.
No, but the point of the local production for local consumption was actually part.
It was there, but when it comes to our actual strategies and our marketing, you find we are all producing for urban rich. The way capital is structured and the capital economy structures, it gives ownership rights to the investors. Because capital always comes only in two forms, as debt or equity. And both forms allows the owners of capital to get the first charge. They get the profits out of that. So participative capital, the concept is a concept where you don't, it's not ownership rights, but only participative rights. So you put in your capital, just as I put in my labor, and he puts in his consumption. So consumers, producers, and investors of capital, all are seen as investors, all work together, and the surplus, if it's generated, is shared by all and not only by the owners of capital. The other point he mentioned is that how do you manage, because we had three, we have cooperatives of producers, we have cooperatives of consumers, and we have cooperatives of investors, though it's not called that. But banks and the stock exchange or stock market and all that is actually a way of aggregating capital. So similarly, the NGO sector have this. But we don't have a cooperative of all three, because this is seen as conflict of interest. Because the producer wants the highest possible price, the consumer wants the lowest possible price, and the investor wants the highest possible return on capital. So because of conflict of interest, they cannot work together. So there cannot be reciprocity as we mentioned in our group. So what in Just Change, the concept is you cannot participate on only one of these three legs. You cannot participate only as a producer saying, I want my goods to be sold, so can you sell my goods for me? Nor can say, I want some good goods, can you give me these goods thing? Nor can you say, I'm willing to invest my capital. You have to be one, at least two of three, if not all three. So that then you see the mutuality, you see the reciprocity. So that's the kind of structure we have, and that's what we're trying to build up. And so we had come up with this notion of participative capital, which is not ownership capital. You do not have ownership rights, you only have participative rights, along with other participants in the whole economy.